Hello and welcome to the Trauma Resonance Resilience podcast with no slick beginnings, no funky tunes, just me and my guest today for our live webinar. And I'm really excited because I open up every conversation with I'm really excited because I wake up really excited.
I don't feel very special now.
Well, no, I'm just really excited like always. So you will feel special in a minute because this is a bit of an introduction. An internationally respected face of child and adolescent mental health who works tirelessly to be the change that she wants to see. She's a prolific keynote speaker, lecturer, trainer, and author. She develops and shares practical, evidence-informed approaches to promoting mental health. She has a PhD in child mental health from the Institute of Psychiatry, is the author of many books. I'm getting a bit bored now. She lives in South London with her 2 daughters, husband, mother-in-law, and 3 dogs. She's a keen climber. She's just all round amazing. Please welcome Pooky Knightsmith.
The crowd goes wild.
Oh, I can make the crowd go wild before you start, actually. This is something that I've been doing on my my training when I felt that somebody needs it. And I think it's really, really important. So important, in fact, that I ought to have had it at the ready just before we started.
Oh, see, now I feel special. Yeah. Thank you.
Totally special. So, Pooky, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Can I ask something really cheeky? I know that you're interviewing me, but I'm really keen obviously to share this with my people too. And just in a nutshell, how do you introduce yourself?
Oh my goodness. How do I introduce myself? It's really difficult because I think for a number of reasons. One is I'm 50, so I've been on the planet for a few years now, which means I've lived a life. The other complication, and I guess this is the same challenge that you have actually, is how you bring together the personal, professional and academic in a nutshell so that people understand how to locate you.
Yeah.
So I'll try and keep it simple and say Lisa Cherry, trainer, speaker and author on trauma, recovery and resilience. I like to speak in threes. And then save the big kind of introductions for training, because it's really difficult, isn't it? You just have to hope that people follow you and people come at your work from many different angles and understand that human beings are very complex. We are not a job title. No. We are a magnitude of experiences. But great question, Pooky. Right, now it's my turn. So
I'm going to keep score because I totally want to ask some questions too, but go on. Yeah, go on.
Do you? Oh, well, this is very lovely. Well, do you know what? Before we get going, I'd really like people to just pop in the chat box where in the country they are, because I like to always, make sure I can say as many names as possible and get people and see how many people.
You know where the places are? Because I'm rubbish at geography. Do you know how many times I got myself in a pickle? Someone going, could you come and present at our conference in wherever? And I'm like, yeah, I'd totally love to. And I'm like, that's 7 hours away. And I thought it was down the road. I mean, I'm really up for it, but yeah, my diary.
Yeah, I love the Shetlands. Yeah, so we've got Malmesbury, London, no? Northern Ireland, Reading, E17, Whitby, North Yorkshire, Staines, Preston, Glasgow, Reading, Liverpool, Lincolnshire, Malaysia, Bolton, Liverpool, Newcastle. I just like a gin and a fag. Like, if you saw my joke earlier, if you didn't see my joke earlier, then that won't mean anything. Bristol,
it's a bit offensive, really, to be honest, Lisa, isn't it?
I know that could come across really badly. It's because I told a joke about something earlier. Now I feel really terrible. So Northeast London, Surrey, Edinburgh. So we've got really such an eclectic mix here, Pooky.
The post-lockdown training we're going to go and deliver Malaysia. That's seemed important to me that we would visit Malaysia face to face, because this is important, the virtual thing. But I think Malaysia. That's probably the place that most needs us, wouldn't you say, Lisa?
I think that every country carries its own ancestral traumas and histories and culturally specific needs for support and connection globally. It's a global conversation, isn't it?
It is a global conversation, but I'd love to go to Malaysia.
Would you?
Nicola's coming. She's going to carry the bags, apparently.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, there we go. Nicola's carrying your bags. So, I mean, I'm interested. Oh, and someone's put a question up below. So please do use the Q&A. I won't be answering them until about 20 to 11. I'll have a look. So if you've got any direct questions, pop them in so that we can have some space to do some questions.
My friend Rachel Morris is here. Hi, Rachel. So she's in Surrey. So Rachel also is a gold medal winning Paralympian. She's one of the most awesome people I know, but also just my friend. So.
Oh, well, she sounds like she'd be good on my podcast.
She totally would. Yeah, you've got to have her on. You see, she's amazing.
We do it all this morning. We'll do it all this morning. So Pooky, what was I was drawn to about speaking to you? I think I'm very fascinated with the idea of a late diagnosis to autism. I think that's something that I'd be really interested in us talking about. And also your work very much, I would say there's an overlap in some of the things that we do, but where you're coming from is probably rooted in a different space than mine, not least because you have your background in psychiatry, etc. So, and I'm also, God, I'm so intrigued by your bookshelf. What on earth is going? I want to show you my chaos. I'm not showing you my bookshelf because you'd just be like, that's just wrong.
I'll come around and sort it out for you. You'll never find anything again unless you like colour like me.
For anyone listening on the podcast rather than watching, Pookys bookshelves are arranged in colour. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. So I actually did record a video about this recently, so I get asked about it a lot, and on my YouTube channel I tend to get more comments about the colour order of my books and my dog, who will make the occasional appearance, than I do about any of my content, which is kind of lovely, sort of deeply insulting in some ways. A bit like I had someone once come up to me after I'd given a presentation and went, "Have you ever considered a career in stand-up?" So that totally wasn't the vibe I was going for at all.
No, but it's a great point. Actually, when we're talking about so much deep stuff all the time, being able to be funny it's one of the things I miss about being in the room, because I stare at a screen now like everybody else. So I have to find myself funny, which I'm not too bad at, I have to say, but it's much nicer if you're looking around a room and other people also find you funny, because this stuff's heavy. And if we can't find a way to loosen up our nervous systems through humour, then it makes it a much more challenging conversation.
It does. No, it does. And I think there's something there that I try and always see the humour in what I'm doing, and to laugh at myself as well. In a nice way, but I think sometimes people get a bit worried about humour when it comes to these deep and difficult topics, because it might be offensive or inappropriate somehow. I think usually you can get away with it more when you're someone who suffers from the thing that you're joking about, and luckily I've got so many different diagnoses, so I can crack a joke on most things really, and get away with it, I think. But no, I find humour to be a really important way of connecting with people, and particularly when we're talking about really tricky stuff like suicide, say, and people are really scared to talk about it. But if actually you can connect in a human way and find a little bit of humour there, and it's obviously not a very funny topic, but I think it breaks the ice a bit, and it makes it just a little bit less awkward, makes it okay to begin to talk about. But I don't ever really set out to be funny. Mainly it's just that because I don't script what I say, and I tend to just go with the flow in the room, and I just sometimes find, often it'll be that I've just misspoken and I've said something that's just so wholly inappropriate and like a pun that's just really wrong, or something like that, and I'll just end up laughing at myself. And I think, well, either you leave it there, or you just you find the humour in what you're doing, don't you? You laugh at yourself and everyone laughs with you, and yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's an interesting place that you started in. How do we bring that personal, professional, academic person 360 into a space that feels accessible for other people? I mean, tell me a bit about that, where you sit with that and what that looks like for you.
That's a really big question, but a really important one. So, and it's actually quite a journey I've been on myself. So I used to just work in the field of mental health, and it had nothing to do with, it was inspired by my own history of mental health issues, but I was kind of in the closet, if you like, with my issues, some of which hadn't been diagnosed at that point, some of which I was maybe sort of deeply ashamed of, actually, or just not ready to share with the world, because you can talk about your lived experience and reflect on the past, and that's quite safe, and people like that, and they're like an inspirational story of, oh, look, and look how well she's doing now. Living experience, though, which is kind of where I'm at now, warts and all, is a lot less comfortable. And I could do the whole lived experience thing and kind of make reference to a past, and I'd moved on and was recovered, and that was fine for a long time. And then it all went to porridge in my 30s, and I got really ill. And I found myself sort of trying to live my life, be a professional, working in the field of mental health, whilst completely unable to cope, and often at risk of dying either by suicide or as a result of starvation through anorexia. And just generally things were pretty tough. And I found myself thinking, I literally wrote the book on self-harm and eating disorders, and here I am in hospital, you know, having wounds seen to and unable to eat. And how can anyone possibly respect me when I can't follow my own advice and guidance? And I had a big kind of crisis of confidence about it. But I have my best friend, Joe. Anyone who kind of follows me will know about Joe. Joe is the most amazing friend, and he used to be my boss, and is a very close friend of mine. And he took me to task, and he said, you inspire so many people and you're a role model, but you're not living authentically, because you're hiding your own story, and people will learn a lot more from you if you're just open and honest and true. And yeah, it's going to be hard, and not everyone's going to accept it, but you can change how people see not just you but mental health generally, and you can change the conversation there. You've got the power to do that. Do it. And it was a big challenge and really hard, because I was so ashamed of the mess I was, and I worried that the professional credibility I'd built up by that point, insofar as it was, that it would just go. Because how can you stand on a stage, or whether it's virtual or literal, how can you stand on a stage and teach people about something when you can't even hold your own stuff together? But what I found was I was completely wrong, and that being open and honest and authentic in my struggles day to day, and just, yeah, allowing myself to be myself has been the best career move that I've ever made, both in terms of kind of, yeah, success in whatever way you might measure it, but also in terms of my ability to impact and make a difference. And I reach people on a really different level now. So I was always able to, you know, the thing I pride myself on is my communication. And like you, Lisa, I think we basically do slightly different things, but the same thing. We take really complicated concepts and we try really hard to allow all the people who are trying to manage this stuff every day to make a difference with those ideas. And that's what I've always prided myself on doing. And I could always communicate those things well, but now I share that I'm not just communicating them, I'm doing them, I'm living them. And yeah, that often when I'm working through a new approach to, I don't know, managing anxiety, say, I'm able to share it with real belief, because it's probably the thing I was doing that morning that meant I was able to leave the house. And yeah. So that was it. That was a long and rambling answer, wasn't it? But yeah, so yeah, that, yeah.
And full of content. I mean, you know, you describe, first of all, don't we all just love Joe? All of us in the room, we're just going, Joe, we love him. But also, if we don't learn to tell our story will tell us, which you just described so beautifully. And I love the distinction you made between lived and living experience. And like you, I worked in the profession in an inauthentic way, because I was so busy trying not to deal with it and was not around enough Joes to support me in being open and honest about my wounds. And I, you know, I think that's something that we really need to unpick, how we make workplaces safe for people to bring their wounds to work in a conscious way rather than subconsciously, which of course is not going to make us the best practitioners.
No. And that's hard though. That is hard, isn't it? Because it's partly, as you say, about making the workplace safe, but it's partly about just changing the conversation generally. I mean, I am really lucky in that I I've got such a huge network of people around me, and granted, some of the things I've said and done and the way that I am doesn't land perfectly with everyone, but where it doesn't lend itself to either progressing in a particular role or getting on with certain people, actually I can move on and work somewhere else. But lots of people aren't in that situation, that if they were open and honest about stuff that's going on with them, that it might mean they're no longer able to do the work or be with the people that mean that they can put food on the table. And yeah, so I fully understand that I come from a place of great privilege here, and I hope that, you know, the work that people like yourself and I do will mean that more people are able to be more authentic. But I do understand it's not just as easy as wanting it.
No, it's a messy space. All of this is a mess because it's full of humans and all the mess that humans bring. And I guess what you're talking about is about how you know, Joe was able to see that place and sit in that place with you, before you were able to sit in that place with yourself. And that's a gift. That's why you speak so highly of him, because that's a huge gift. And isn't it the gift that we all want, that we are able not just to go into that murky space with other people, but we do so having been and sat in that murky space with ourselves. Harnessing.
And I think the thing that he showed me, and why it mattered so much, because he wasn't a close friend before all this. He was my boss, and I had huge respect for him, but he wasn't a close friend. We made friends through him repeatedly saving my life and enabling me to keep finding a way forwards. But he stepped up in a really authentic and honest way, but also just showed completely unconditional care. I mean, the stuff I've put Joe through, we were chatting about it just a couple of nights ago, because now I'm slightly further removed from that particularly dark kind of time, and I'm able to stop, and I don't remember it all because I do, you know, I dissociate, and a lot of it is, I don't remember the ins and outs, but there's moments I can remember, you know, a particular moment when I was beginning to learn to cry, and doing that quite epically with Joe in the library, the British Library, very public space, and he just sat there and sat with me, sat through it, didn't run from that distress, ran towards it, asked more questions, allowed more space for me to think and cry. And it was, he did that kind of thing a lot. And also, you know, stuff around food. When I was learning to eat again, he would just sit with me for however long it took for me to eat. If I was trying a new food, I would often do it with him. And he would just sit there, and it was really messy and uncomfortable and so public often, you know, we'd be in McDonald's eating McFlurry, and he'd just sit there with that pain and just you know, we joke about it some, and that's the thing, again, finding the humor. He'd often say afterwards, he'd be like, you know, people must think I'm the most horrible boyfriend or something, because he, you know, when people wonder what story people would be telling about what was going on in this conversation, why this man was just kind of sat there and I'd be there crying into my McFlurry, and you wonder what the stories were that people tell, and he never let anything about what anyone else might think or say or do to impact on anything that he did as a friend. And so it's really powerful.
I just love that it was in the British Library. There's something, my inner diva just kind of loves that. If you're going to do that, then let's pick a really beautiful piece of architecture to go and kind of do that in. I think that's stunning. Surrounded by all those books that will not have been color coded, of course.
I know, right?
So tell me how you ended up getting a late diagnosis of autism. What was that journey like?
That journey. So I was in hospitalised with anorexia, not getting any better, getting actively worse, despite the fact that I was having really good, really intensive care, but I was completely unable to engage with the treatment at all. Was going backwards rather than forwards. Everything felt really, really rather hopeless. And I had a really good team around me who were trying really hard, but it seemed like the more that we tried, the worse things seemed to get, the more entrenched I became, the iller I got. And I had a psychologist and a psychiatrist who were working with me alongside the rest of the team. And it was when the psychologist, my therapist, I've been working with by that time for a while, but he and my psychiatrist, essentially they kind of put it out there as, this might be what's going on, and they kind of mused that perhaps this was a part of the issue and might help us to unlock more helpful forms of treatment for me. And so we explored it together, and found that when once I got that diagnosis, which I don't, to be honest, remember huge amounts about, because I was in very intensive, like 24/7 treatment under 24-hour watch, because I was a suicide risk and all those things. It was a very difficult sort of time. And bluntly, when you're in that sort of situation, you're spending your whole time like being involved in various kind of conversations around whatever it is, diagnosis or treatment, and it's all a bit of a blur. But the diagnosis came about essentially because the team around me recognized that this might be the case. And then overnight, once we then thought this might be the appropriate route, then I began to be treated as if autistic, and we just found that literally overnight things began to change. So things like all of the therapy, and this is quite common with eating disorders, all the therapy was group therapy, which I just can't engage with at all. And as soon as I was told, well, okay, you don't need to do group therapy, but the skills are really important, so we'll do that one-to-one. And instantly I went from not being able to engage and being in complete panic in group therapy to actually being able to work one-to-one with someone I'd built up a really good trust and rapport with, and begin to look at those skills and then begin to apply them. Other things like I had an issue around, at one point literally everything had become a fear food. There was one thing I could consume and I could only consume that in one flavor. It was a liquid, like one of those kind of supplements, and they didn't have the right flavor at one point, so they were going to force feed me. But when we reflected on what happened there through the lens of autism, and understood that actually the flavor really mattered to me, and there were different reasons why that mattered. It wasn't just an anorexia control thing, that was an autism thing. We looked at it through a different lens, and it meant I was able to build and repair some of the bridges that had been quite broken with some of my treatment team. Yeah, but the main thing was, I think the main thing for me at that moment when I got that diagnosis actually was, it was both a revelation. I felt completely stupid, Lisa. I'd worked with autism. I knew quite a lot about autism, and I'd worked in the field and worked with autistic people and those who work with and care for them for years, and it had never occurred to me that this might be my story. But as soon as I got that diagnosis and began to think about it, I was a bit like, obviously so much about myself made sense, and it meant that I was able to begin to think about, well, how do I look after myself better? What does self-care look like, and how do I manage this thing called life? And so it was a very helpful springboard, but it was also quite crushing, because at this point, although there were many times when I didn't want to go on and I couldn't imagine wanting to ever live life again at that time, there was a tiny part of me that had held on, and I had amazing people around me, and I knew that if only I could just get hold of the end of the rope, that there was a life waiting for me. But of course I'd imagined what that life might look like one day, and then suddenly I got this diagnosis that said, no, your life's never going to look like that, because actually some of these issues that you're facing, you'll recover from. You're not going to recover from autism. You're just like that. That's you. That's fundamentally who you are. So these dreams that one day I'll be like, enjoy throwing dinner parties with all my friends, that's never going to happen. And actually I've come to a peace with that now. But at the time it was, yeah, I don't know. I had to reimagine the future, I guess. Yeah.
And reimagine. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think really highlights how important language is, how important relationships are, all the stuff that we talk about in our work. You know, what you've just described is really what does that look like? You know, and that's one of the things, I don't know if you find this, but talking about relationships a lot in professional settings, it occurs to me that when we don't break down what that actually looks like,
yeah,
it's very difficult for people perhaps who've had relationships with ease or relationships through attachment. It's very difficult to support people in really understanding what it takes to build the kind of relationships that make a difference with people who potentially have found relationships very difficult or have had severed attachments. So breaking down what that means is where the personal becomes so important, because you're describing there the role of Joe, you're describing the team that was working around you. They were also going through their light bulb moments, and you had to be patient with them. You had to be patient with them as they fathomed, you know, how to make sense of you when you were not in a space that was making sense of you at the time.
Yeah,
it's big work, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was big work. But it's been a real gift actually, and it has helped my understanding, and it has meant that I've got a really clear understanding. I'm not always able to do it 100% brilliantly, but I have got a really clear understanding of the things that I do find challenging, and I know why now, and what I need to do in order to look after myself better. So getting well was really hard, but staying well is hard, but I'm much more able to manage it. And I know it lots of people have different feelings about labels, but actually being able to go somewhere and say, look, I'm autistic, so I need you to do this to help me, please. I've never yet had a situation where someone said no, in just the same way that, I said before, so Rachel's on the call. So Rachel has no legs. So obviously when she goes places, then sometimes we need to make kind of amendments so that she's able to access. And actually our needs are completely different, but it's kind of the same. And it's not the same, but you know what I mean. I need people to meet me where I am, and in order for me to do a good job for them, they need to make allowances. And for me, that might look like I need a room to go off separately and eat my lunch. But for Rachel, it's I need a ramp to get in, and you need to make sure that I can use my wheelchair safely on your stage. It's different needs, but actually, it's all about us being able to just be seen as ourselves, and people around us making, the choices that we need, so that they can help us to be ourselves. I don't know, I'm not explaining that well, but yeah.
Well, I think you are, and I think what you're highlighting is actually, don't we all just need to be met with where we are? In that relational moment, aren't we all hoping that someone is curious enough to get to know us a bit better, or to figure something out, or it's that whole as well, something slightly different, but I was thinking about the, what sits behind the behavior. So if you don't have those needs met, and I equally can pull out of the bag a million of examples for myself, but just to stay with that, if you don't have those needs met, then your behavior is going to let people know that you're struggling. Something that you do will alert someone who's curious, actually she's struggling here. And that's what we're really trying to harness in professional settings, isn't it? It's that curiosity, it's that not taking people personally, it's looking behind the behavior, it's having an ability to think about what actually is this person struggling with, because I'm sure it's not all about me, so so we've got some nice stuff here. So Rachel's saying very well explained, good analogy, and Nicola's talking about kind curiosity, and someone sharing that they didn't have a good approach in a specialist centre for an eating disorder, and they didn't approach anorexia and autism in a different way to those not on the spectrum in the way that you described. And I guess that leads us into a little bit of system trauma, doesn't it? What happens when systems and organizations actually add to the harm?
Yeah, indeed. I think just it would be remiss of me not to just note at that point for the person who mentioned that I'm involved with a project called the Peace Pathway at the moment, which is a funded project at the Maudsley, where we're developing a clinical pathway for people who've got comorbid autism and anorexia, and using patient experience to really develop that pathway, because we are understanding that there's massive underdiagnosis of autism in girls generally, and in girls with eating, it's much more commonly comorbid than we might think, and the treatment does need to be different, and there's lots that we can do quite simply that makes a massive difference, and we are working really hard to reach as far and as wide as we can with the outcomes of that project as fast as we can. It's not as fast as we'd like, because we'd like it to be done 10 years ago, and I'm really sorry to hear that experience, and we're hearing so many awful stories, but we are trying to make change happen as fast as we can. But sorry, your question was a different one around system trauma. I think it, and that can be, I think when people have bad experiences of treatment, no matter whether it's big or small, actually those things can make a real difference. And it's a bit like I always teach people, if they work with youngsters and it's likely that young person might need to be referred to the GP to access treatment, which is a common pathway in, for example, and I always have to prepare people for the fact that when you're going to the GP, you've got to do your research, make sure you talk to the right person in the practice. You've got to work out what you're going to say, what you're trying to get out of that appointment, but you've also got to prepare yourself for the fact the appointment might not go how you want and you might get knocked back. And we've got to be quite resilient. And whether it's you going for yourself or you're supporting someone, you have to be prepared that you might not get the outcome that you want and need. And going in knowing that, I think, helps. But what can happen if we're not prepared for that is that it makes us feel really unheard and really unvalidated, and makes us think that, well, maybe I don't deserve help. And particularly with mental health issues, if you go and someone doesn't hear when you ask for help, it's really hard to ask again often. And I think that can be really challenging. And I've certainly had some really difficult knockbacks where I've been very lucky to have very brilliant people around me, and that kind of inner determination to change the system. So when I've presented with self-harm, I've been met with amazing kindness and care in some places, but I've also been met with just the most amazing disregard and disrespect that it's very difficult to manage, very, very difficult. And if I hadn't have had, my husband's been amazing. You know, there's been times where I've gone and I've been so upset by the treatment I've received that I just don't want to go back. And he's helped me and stood with me whilst I then have gone back and got the treatment needed at the time. And the thing is, I wonder then, well, I'm there as a fully fledged adult who's got a really good understanding of the system, really good contacts, really able to go to other places, and a husband right by my side all the time, always, through everything. What if I was a scared 13-year-old kid and I dropped up and I got that treatment? I probably would never ask for help from anyone again, ever.
And I think that there's, staying with the theme of curiosity, what you're describing to me is what I've worked with, what I see in the training room, is this complete mix of sheer brilliance, empathy, love, nurture, passion, right next to a disregard of a person's pain, the journey that got them to that place, and the potential for them after that place. And I'm always really curious about that mix of people, because it's across every sector. I work across every sector, and I think you're certainly moving to work across every sector as well, if not already. I can't remember what we said, but when you are going into every single sector and it is like that, it's really interesting to me what brings people into the work if you don't have that complete passion for other humans. And for, there's so many other jobs you could do if being passionate about creating the right environment for the flower to bloom next to you as a flower, if you don't have that, I'm curious about that.
But do you think there's a problem sometimes, Lisa, where maybe people go in with the best intentions and either time passes or things change, or just the pressures on them are such? So maybe you work in a school and you do, or you might work in the child and adolescent mental health service, and you really care about every child that comes through your door, but actually you've got to get through so many in a day and the need's so high and it's beyond what you feel actually trained to manage. And maybe you've got your own unresolved stuff going there. And so you can't be kind of who, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, where maybe the situation makes it hard for you to be the person that someone might need because of time or money. Or
I'm totally down with that, and I'm very fascinated and interested in how organizations don't necessarily create the best environments for people to work in to be the best that they can be, which is why one of the courses I've been doing isn't about just self-care, it's about organizational care, and it's about collective care. How do we look after each other, and how do we make sure that our organization is fit for purpose? And I guess there is still, I've met people who work in the most awful situations. And I suppose to be fair, they either leave or they fight that system themselves, which is incredibly exhausting on top of the work that you have to do. So yeah, I hear that. But I also think that if you are coming to a service, you deserve the best that you can get. And, having worked as a professional with unresolved issues that didn't feel unresolved because I was in therapy and I thought I was doing fine, but I wasn't able to be that 360 person we were talking about, then I feel very strongly that we have to make sure that organisations have good mentors, they have good clinical practice available, and that those mechanisms are in place.
And if you could go back to that, you know, if you could go and talk to your former self before you kind of got that 360 thing going on, right, then what do you think you could have sort of told yourself or advised yourself? And do you think the past you would have been ready and able to listen and act on that?
I think I was very open to therapeutic and clinical work because my own story is that I had a pretty tumultuous childhood and ended up in an AA meeting at the age of 20, and I haven't had a drink or a drug since. So that was a long time ago. But what that did is it opened up a recovery journey where once I wasn't self-medicating on drink and drugs, I knew that I had to go and I needed to deal with the other stuff. It's just nobody that I met understood what the other stuff was. They didn't understand what birth separation does to a person. They didn't understand what rejection from a family looks like, relinquishment. They didn't understand what the care experience is. So they didn't understand moving to lots of different places. So I think a distinct lack of understanding about what the care experience does to a person meant that even though I was in the right settings for help, nobody was asking the right questions, and we weren't having the right explorations. Did it make me a worse practitioner? I'm probably more scathing of myself than any of the people would be that I worked with.
Yeah.
You know, because the driver for me has always been from a place of compassion. Certainly in my 20s, it was about feistiness, you know, fighting the system. I'm going to make the system better, you know, that wonderful youthful energy. And I've still got it. I really genuinely have still got it. So I'm really pleased about that. And I had a chat with Eunice, who was my the only social worker whose name I remember, who I've been in contact with for about 10 years, and we're doing a piece for BASWA. And we had this conversation yesterday. She said, at 16, you were taking the local authority to the newspapers. Do you know what I mean? So I've always been that person. And I felt like that about people I was working alongside. Yeah. So what would I say to my former self? I'd probably say, you know, with what was available, and with the questions that you were asked, you know, you did the best that you could. And of course that stimulates that compassion then, I guess. But I still think that people that I was working with could have had a better version of me if the environments that I worked in and the therapeutic interventions I had were more knowledgeable about human distress. You know, why do you go into therapy? You know, you go into therapy, you're showing up because life, you can't make sense of life. Why can't you make sense of life? Oh, your relationships are not, they're very interesting. Oh, you keep bringing up your mother. Oh, this keeps happening. So what, let's explore that. What does that look like? Oh, you were in care. Right, okay, interesting. There's something going on there that we can work with. You know, let's get better at asking better questions, actually.
And not be scared. I think sometimes people are scared, aren't they, to go there. What I'm interested about Eunice. Why is Eunice the one social worker whose name you remember? What was special about her?
Well, these are the conversations that we've had publicly, in not publicly as in on YouTube, but we've had these conversations in settings with other social workers, because these are, and this is what the piece is that we're writing up for the 50th anniversary of BASWA. It's about the relationship, because she wasn't actually a social worker for very long. But what she did was she was very boundaried, she was very consistent. She met me where I was, and it felt safe. So all the stuff that me and you talk about endlessly in our work, again, that's a beautiful example for me of what that looks like across the life course, because she remembers things about me from 35 years ago.
Wow.
And I think that speaks volumes.
Do you think that she remembers you in that way because she got to know you really deeply, and that was something she did with the children that she worked with? Or do you think there was something very particular about the relationship that you and she specifically built?
No, I don't think it was specific to me and her, although I definitely think I liked her. And I'm guessing she liked me. But I think she was only 10 years older than me, so she was 25 when I was 15, which is very young, really. And she did move into adoption afterwards. But I think she was that sort of person. She's very professional, you know, so she was very interested in being very boundaried and, you know, consistent and all that other stuff. And she will have been very conscientious at 25, you know, she will have wanted to get it right. That's a very young age to have so much responsibility. So yeah, I think it was a lot about the kind of practitioner that she really aspired to be. And yesterday when we were talking, she said that she'd had an amazing practice supervisor at 18 that really supported her on her journey. So yet again, we hear that kind of mentoring, that clinical supervision, that relational approach, the stuff that really makes a difference to people that we often don't notice, we don't record, we don't talk about, but we would all have stories of those people that we've met along the way that made that difference and that shift.
It's incredible to hear that she would have been so young. And I wonder as well, like, if part of it was that she was able to be so boundary, so you knew how that relationship worked, you knew you could feel maybe a little bit safer in that relationship because of those clear boundaries. But was it not hard for you at that age, when you'd been through so many maybe different social workers and obviously quite a challenging background, the idea that you liked her, wasn't that kind of scary to you? You know, that you might form this I don't know, maybe that's me projecting what I might have felt in that. There's a danger, isn't there, when you build a relationship, that what happens?
And I think that's a question that me and you are probably asked a lot, especially in the context of a school, for example, you know, where there are concerns about building attachment relationships that are going to come to an end. And I always say, well, we all have attachment relationships that have an end, so we need to learn how to do that. So let's learn how to do that well. But yes, I mean, that's a really good question, isn't it? Did I have a fear as the receiver of that? No, not at all. I mean, I would have been suspicious of her, but I think when you've got constant different relationships because you're in a system like that, you're just really happy that you've met someone who you like and who'll listen. I mean, I left her before she left me. You know, I went AWOL, and it was another 6 months before I think the file was closed, which is a beautiful terminology. The Lisa Cherry file was closed. But listen, we're in murky territory of you becoming the interviewer. So I'm going to move, you're so good, Pooky. So I'm going to move us into Q&A because we've got a few questions down here. So Manda asks, what are the links between girls' autism and eating disorders, and how can this be masked?
Ooh, so as in, why do we not pick it up? So, okay, so this is a big and deep and complicated question, and I think it's really important to disclose from the offset here that we're still learning a lot about this. It's a really young science. So first of all, starting off just with girls and autism generally. So autism is a diagnosis that historically all the kind of diagnostic criteria and our understanding of it and our stereotypes about it are that this is a condition that mainly affects boys. And if we were looking for it in girls ever, we would be looking for a male presentation. autism, whereas actually girls generally present with autism quite differently. So things like we might have an understanding about autism that many people who are autistic will have special interests, so things that they will obsess over. So a typical one is trains. Like there's a stereotype around that, but loads of autistic people genuinely have a really deep interest in trains, for example. Girls, often their special interests, those things that they will learn a huge amount about and talk about endlessly and know everything about, they tend to be much more socially acceptable. So it might be like horses or ballet or something that little girls generally are, you know, it's okay for a little girl to talk about those things endlessly. Whereas when we see a boy become obsessed with trains, then we go, maybe he's autistic. You know what I mean? It instantly we begin thinking, oh, is there something here? So it's partly about the things that they might have their special interest in is one of the reasons we might kind of miss those cues. The next really important one is that for reasons I don't understand yet, and there might be good emerging research on it, but girls are much better generally, and yeah, it's a generalization because we get boys that present in this way too, but girls are much better generally at kind of mimicking what good social interaction might look like. So we're really good at passing as neurotypical. One of the most common and genuinely unhelpful reactions I get when I disclose that I'm autistic to people who've known me for a long time is either disbelief or complete invalidation. No, you're not, you can't possibly be because X, Y, Z. What people don't know is that when we are doing normal, that comes at huge cost to us personally, and that there's a huge amount of anxiety, just a huge amount of thinking that comes with it. So just having a regular conversation with someone takes a massive toll because we're constantly thinking either on a conscious or a subconscious level about how to do this right, and trying to second guess what everyone else is doing, working really hard to interpret their body language. And that does become obviously a somewhat subconscious process, and we might not even know we're doing it, but it would be equivalent of, I don't know, if you were working in another country and maybe you knew that language quite well but not perfectly, and you'd have to just think harder and you'd be tired by the end of the day, right? And that's true for us. So we're better at masking it. We get by, people don't pick it up, they're not looking for it. So that's a general thing with girls and autism. We don't tend to see it, and often therefore it's lasts for a long time, but there's a lot of underlying kind of anxiety, emotional dysregulation, and kind of internal sort of trauma kind of going on there as a result of not really fitting in, not really feeling that people understand you, not building relationships in quite the same way that other people might. And so one of the ways that can then sometimes play out is that we might take control of food, or food might take control of us, whichever way we look at it, and that might be one of the ways in which we cope. Self-harm also, I think, relatively prevalent in autistic girls, and we see lots of other kind of comorbid sort of mental health and emotional well-being issues. The complexity with the interaction between autism and anorexia in particular, so we would see an increase across all the eating disorders, but autism and anorexia is a particularly potent and toxic mix, because when you starve the brain, actually anyone with a starved brain begins to behave somewhat autistic. So we think in a much more basic and childlike way because our brain is starved, and functions begin to shut down a bit. So our thinking becomes a lot more black and white. We become a lot more rigid. We introduce a lot of rules around how we do things, and that's quite typical for people with anorexia, that we'd see that. So when you combine that with an actual autistic diagnosis as well, like you become, it's just a very, very potent mix. The good news, and what we're trying to understand more about, is that where you've got that mixture, it's a real it's a thing that really drives and maintains the illness. And one of the reasons I was able to get so ill was that combination of the autism rules and black and white thinking and the rigidity feeding into the illness. But actually, when you flip that, it can feed into wellness as well. So, I like structure, I like rules, I like routine. I will do as I'm told. If I've come to an agreement with someone or myself on that, and actually now doing as I'm told is about self-care and eating nutritionally and making sure that I meet those requirements each day. So you can flip it and use it in your benefit too. But it's a really, yeah, I don't know if I did it justice there. It's a very complicated thing. We don't fully understand it, but we do know that small changes can make a big difference. So if you are autistic and highly anxious and trying to deal with food, someone just recognizing, one of the simplest and best things anyone did for me was go, hey, actually food's really, really stressful for you. You're really anxious around food for a whole variety of different things. It's not helping that we're trying to make you eat with other people. So maybe we'll just have one person, we'll do this in the same way every day, we'll plan it ahead so you know what to expect, we'll control as much as we can, and do you know what, in the short term we will give you medication so that actually you can numb that feeling and you can begin to build up some positive relationships. And that's not just about the autism, but I think it made it easier to make those decisions because yeah, we understood there was so much else at play here. Yeah,
I think you did do that question very much justice, and yeah, and I was thinking about how many other intersections there are,
yeah,
and around ADHD as well in girls, which is another area that's really difficult to get a diagnosis. And I have a daughter with undiagnosed, I think, ADHD, and doing lots of research. And I'm not a fan of labels or disorders, and that hasn't helped her particularly, that I'm that way. But once I was able to embrace a label, that really helped her, because she felt she had a language then by which to explain things, not just to herself but to me, which was good for our relationship. We've got another question here that looks at intersection actually. Again, notwithstanding our views about disorders and labels, it says the peace pathway looks at the link between anorexia and autism. Is there a project that looks at the link between autism and, again, notwithstanding any views we may have about this term, and personality disorder? Do you have any advice for adapting treatment for patients with comorbid conditions?
Great question. I'm not aware of a project of that type about autism and personality disorder, as you say. Yeah, the term, it's a whole nother podcast there. But personality disorder isn't a particular area of expertise for me, and the peace pathway that I've mentioned I know about because I'm involved with it. So it's a slightly awkward thing where actually my psychiatrist is also on the team there, and at the point at which I'd become a little bit uncomfortable and begun to disengage with treatment, I was turning up as a professional to these meetings, and then she went, hi, sorry, I skipped on. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But so the reason I know about that one is because I'm personally involved with it, both with the kind of lived experience and providing professional input. But there may well be, I'm not aware of anything, and I'll certainly put it out there. I'll ask my Twitter network, someone will know. The deeper question there about advice for adapting treatment for patients with comorbid conditions is, I actually think, so labels do really help, and certainly for me the label of autism really helped, and also I got around the same time a diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which again really helped me to direct my therapy and use the right evidence-based therapy to begin to really fix some very, very old trauma. And it's all been part of quite a complicated picture, and so those labels did really help me. They helped me understand myself, they helped me explain myself to other people, just like you said with your daughter. But I also think, do you know what, sometimes the most helpful thing we can do is just lose all the labels, and particularly where someone's got a really complicated kind of pathology and symptomology, and just look at them as a person, and actually just stop and ask ourselves, you know, where are they at the moment? What would help them today? What might help them next week and next month? And what's my role here? And granted, labels will help us to use the best evidence-based treatment and so on and so forth. But often, when we have a hammer, everything's a nail, and whichever expertise someone comes in with us, that's what they'll see. And even when we get a label, labels are messy. You know, they're always updating the diagnostic criteria. So DSM-5 sitting somewhere in the background there in the purple section, Lisa, in the purple section.
I'm so glad you told me which colour. I feel better now. Thank you.
How are you going to find it else? So the DSM-5, so our like Bible of kind of diagnoses, essentially. This was re-released. DSM-5 came out after DSM-4 because they're logical like that, during the time when I was writing up my PhD thesis, which my thesis you just write one thesis. So I didn't cover all my work, and I looked specifically at eating disorders because that was the department I was working with, and it's how it's funded. And the diagnostic criteria for eating disorders were completely revised during the time I was writing up my thesis. And that was important and helpful and good, and it moved us forward. But it also made us stop and reflect on, well, have we been getting this wrong then? Have things really changed, or is it just our understanding that's changed? And if it can change once, will it change again? And so it does begin to question, well, how useful is a diagnosis and a label? And so, yeah, I think sometimes looking past the labels and seeing the person is the most helpful thing that we can do if someone's complicated in particular. That was a long answer.
No, great answer. And I think that's a thesis of itself, isn't it? During writing my thesis, you know, these labels got rewritten. But I'm just going to finish on one question. I don't think, did I say I was going to finish on one question before? But what Nicola has asked is, so many children internalise that sense of difference where there is no diagnosis. How do we ensure children with undiagnosed needs are met in schools? And I think that is a fantastic question, because actually the reality is that for lots of those children, their needs will not be met in school. And in my experience, then they will leave school and their needs will not be met in a college either. And the spiral that happens during that transition into adulthood is one I have lived with and observed, and it is very painful on a personal level. Very, very, very difficult.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's really challenging. Although it sounds like you're headed in a more positive direction now, which is.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. We are in a much, much, much better place. And there's lots of, if I'd known then what I know now, and actually getting any kind of diagnosis for girls, which you've talked about, 6+ years ago, would just not have happened. So those needs were very unmet through school. And the biggest outcome of that was excruciating anxiety and very, very low self-esteem. But that's not the answer that we want to finish on, because Nicola has asked us a question. So we want to say, okay, so we know that. So what is it that we can do about that? How do we support professionals better?
And actually that question dives right into the very core of why I do what I do every day. So thank you for planting that question. So what I do every day is about recognizing that the system is broken. The system there's more need than there is capacity, and there's all sorts of things that are wrong with it. But actually, we are surrounded in our lives every day as a child by adults who really give a damn about us, and they have historically been really disempowered from helping, because we've been told for years that these issues are the realms of experts and specialists, and you should not have these conversations unless you've had XD years of training. And then, you know, the child will maybe get a diagnosis and get some support from a highly specialized person for like an hour a week if they're really lucky, maybe for as many as 12 weeks. Okay, there's a lot of other hours in the week, there's a lot of other time in their life, and the rest of us are there trying desperately to pick up the pieces. So what I do is I try to help people to recognize where a child might be struggling for whatever reason. And I do support people in understanding labels and responding to specific needs. But actually, it's more about seeing children as little humans, and recognizing their strengths as well as their challenges, and recognizing our strengths as well as our challenges, and seeing where those two meet, and giving people really simple ideas, informed and influenced and inspired by what works well in clinical practice, what the science and the research tells us works, but mostly inspired by what we see working every day and what's actually practical to do. And then when we get that right, and it's, you know, it's the work of a lifetime, but I'm reaching as many people as I can. When we get that right, actually we find that parents, teaching assistants, school nurses, teachers, everybody can do this. If you are someone who can love, and be loved, you know, build that relationship. If you are someone who can listen, and we can all learn to be better listeners, but you know, we've all got 2 ears at the end of the day, and we've all got some skill there that can be developed. And if you're willing to kind of I don't know, learn and laugh with the child, then you can make a huge difference. And I think it's as simple and as complicated as that. So my work, albeit there's loads of different things that I do, the number one gift I'm ever able to give to people is confidence to do what they maybe felt in their heart, or that their experience showed them maybe work, but they didn't have the confidence to do it. And now maybe they go tomorrow and they might have some more ideas. We might have built their skills up a little bit, but mainly they do what they were doing and they do it knowing that it's going to make a difference, and having confidence to do so.
And that's what it's all about, Pooky. And I think that's where our paths really meet, when we can show the power of those relationships, demonstrate what a difference we can make when we have those meaningful opportunities to meet people where they're at. Yeah. Pooky, you've been amazing. Thank you so much. We could have done this for hours, but I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for coming today.
No, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure, and I'd love to. I just want to ask you more questions. Really, I've got so many questions. But no, and you know, on a really serious note, thank you so much for all that you're doing for the sector, because there are lots of people out there, but not many people who are kind of impacting in such a practical, relational, down-to-earth way. And I think you need to be careful to look after yourself, because you must be taking on a lot right now. It's a really challenging time, but you are making so much more difference than I think you could ever know, because you're just touching so many lives in the work you're doing. So thank you.
Pooky, now I'm going to cry. So I'm going to leave on that note. Big love to you.
Yeah.
Big love.
And to you too. And thanks everyone for coming along.